Sure, thank
Sure,
you.
Dr. Zhang. I think Talia already did.
Okay, good. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the USF Transition Seminar. And this is Yu Zhang. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering in the College of Engineering at USF. And I want to mention that this seminar is sponsored by CE Department, Carter Center for Urban Transition Research, and it's also a webinar of the CTEC, which is Center for Transportation, Environment, and Community Health, the Tier 1 University Transition Center sponsored by USDOT, and also sponsored by another two UTCs are TOMIT and also NISA. And this seminar is facilitated by our student chapters of ITE and also WTS. And for this seminar in particular, we also invite the WTS Tampa Bay chapter members and friends to join us. Okay, so I want to first introduce our speakers. And we have two speakers from FDOT District 7 office. First, I want to introduce Kelli Brandley. And she's a professional engineer and also the program management administrator of District 7 office. And Kelli is registered professional engineer in both Michigan and Florida. She got the degree from the Trail State University, now called Trine University, with a bachelor degree in civil engineering. And she started a career as a roadway designer for the Michigan DOT. And after that, he relocated to Tampa and worked the first year in District 7 office as an in-house roadway design team leader, and then be promoted to as the PSE engineer for the District 7. And now she has served as a program manager administrator for 4.5 years. And our second speaker is Megan Miller, and she's also a professional engineer, and she's a special projects engineer of District 7 office. And Megan graduated from University of Missouri-Rolla and now called Missouri Science and Technology. And she holds a bachelor degree in geological engineering. And after graduation, she worked for environmental consultant, focusing on the solid waste landfill design and engineering. She was in Chicago area and then moved to Tampa. She worked for the Hillsborough County before and then joined FDOT in 2016 as special agent coordinates and then promoted to special project engineer in December 2019. Okay, so thank you so much for accepting our invitation and join us for today's seminar. And I really appreciate that. So I'll give the control to both of you and look forward to your presentation.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. And bear with me a second. I seem to always mess this up when I try to share my screen, but I will do my best to get this rolling. Okay. 1 second. All right. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see that.
Awesome. All right. And here we go. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for inviting Megan and I to speak with you today. We're excited to share with you an overview of what we do for the Florida Department of Transportation here in Tampa. Today, we'll be covering the duties of our Program Management Office within District 7, and I'll start off, and then Megan's going to wrap it up by talking about all of the exciting special projects that she handles for the district. All right, so first I'd like to give you an overview of what program management actually does. And I'll start by stating that FDOT has 7 districts across the state. We also have a Florida Turnpike Enterprise, which handles toll roads throughout the state, as well as our central office, which resides in Tallahassee. So each district does things a little differently, of course. So what we discuss here will be how District 7 handles everything out of the program management office. District 7 includes the counties of Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, Hernando, and Citrus. Managing the program for our district has a lot of moving parts. Included within our department are 6 sort of sub-departments, and that is the Office of Work Program, the Plans, Specifications, and Estimates Office, Production Management, Local Programs, GIS, and Special Projects. And collectively, this group ensures that FDOT follows our mission statement, and that is that the department will provide a safe transportation system that ensures the mobility of people and goods, enhances economic prosperity, and preserves the quality of our environment and communities. So for a little more in-depth discussion on what we do, I'll start with our Work Program Office, also known here in the district as the Money People. So when FDOT talks about our work program, we're talking about our 5-year plan that is developed and maintained to maximize our production and service capabilities. We must develop our plan to ensure fiscal responsibility and compliance. This 5-year plan includes funding for the priority projects within our district, which includes all phases necessary to complete the projects. This includes initial planning, onto right-of-way, over to design, which includes utilities, rail, environmental mitigation, and then on to construction and ultimately to maintenance of our facilities. Our work program office's main responsibility is to build and maintain this 5-year work program. And this is no easy task, given the over 250 different pots of money that they manage, each with their own specific rule on what they can be used for. We also have over 500 projects, just shy of 500 projects that are at some stage of development within the district. So, I mentioned these pots of money, and some of them can only be used on certain things such as maybe bridge rehab or maybe constructing a trail, and others are more flexible and can be used pretty much on any state roadway for any purpose. So work program's job is to maximize those pots of money and fund as many projects as they can for our district. So why do we have a 5-year work program? Why can't we just keep that one big pot of money and throw it at projects as we wish? Well, we have to report to the Florida Transportation Commission, also known as the FTC. This is an independent 9-member commission that evaluates, reviews, and makes recommendations on matters pertaining to Florida transportation policies and initiatives. They maintain oversight and public accountability for FDOT and other transportation authorities. They have criteria that we must meet each year, and we're literally graded on how well we do. We have to answer questions such as, was our work program developed in coordination with our MPOs? We also have measures we strive to meet each year. Examples of those include the amount of consultant or right-of-way or construction dollars we actually spend versus our planned amount. We also are graded on construction projects, and if we completed those projects within 20% of original contract time, stuff like that. There's a whole bunch. There's a huge list of stuff that they track for us. So those are just a few examples. And having a work program also allows us to plan for future projects, from planning through construction and maintenance, as well as allowing us to adjust as our finances change, which we'll talk about more later. So by having a 5-year work program, it allows us to ensure that if we design a project, we buy the right-of-way for the project, that we actually have the needed construction funds to let the project and construct it. So this future planning allows us to keep projects moving through the pipeline. Here I'm just showing an example of our one of the pages in our adopted work program. This document is the final document that is created at the end of every year when we update our projects. So this particular version was adopted by the governor last July 1st, last year, 2020. So this document is hundreds of pages long, showing each project that has funding on any phase over the next 5 years. So you can see here, I don't know if my mouse shows up, no, but you can see the project number, you see the project description on here, the phase, CST being construction, PE being design, the fund code, and then how much money we have funded on those phases in the fiscal years shown. So this document is produced and is available to anyone who wants to take a look at it, and may be reviewed and commented on once a year during our work program public hearing, which typically takes place during the fall. So now on to PS&E. And the way I like to describe the P and the S, at least of PS&E, is that the plans are, the pretty pictures and show what needs to be constructed, and then the specs are the words that go with it. And both of them go together and are provided to the contractor to construct the project. So the plans show you where to construct something, and the specs tell you how to construct it, such as what materials to use, how to measure it, and how to pay for it. DOT strives for consistency, so we have documents that most of you are aware of, such as standard plans, which show you, different elements of design in your plans and how to show those. And we have a design manual, used to be called the Plans Prep Manual, which indicates the required design criteria for the elements that you'll include in those designs. The PS&E department must ensure that the plans are consistent with our standards and the correct specs are being used for each particular project. This group is also in charge of preliminary construction cost estimates for all projects. Having a good cost estimate years before a project is actually funded for construction helps in those planning efforts with work program, where they only have so much money in those pots. So for example, if we underestimate a project, when it comes time to let it to a contractor, we might not have enough to actually fund it. So then what do we do? So these project estimates are very critical to the success of our work program. Another aspect of managing the project is our production management group. So when work program programs a project, it's programmed in a certain year. The FDOT fiscal years run from July 1st to June 30th. So much like an accurate estimate to ensure that we have enough money, we also need to ensure that that project can actually be ready in the fiscal year that it's funded. Our funds have to be spent in that fiscal year. They can't just be spent whenever we think we're ready for it. Our production management group has schedules for all projects that are in development. They include things such as phase submittals, review times, utility milestones, right-of-way activities, and permit activities, just to name a few. Those schedules are updated as activities occur, and if we get behind, the schedules will tell us, and those projects end up on a naughty report, and the PM has to find a way to get them back on track. We're measured statewide on meeting our schedules. And while we do have to meet, the fiscal year in which they're programmed, we're actually measured down to the month every year for certain activities. So schedules must be accurate, and that's another big part of managing our program. So here's a screenshot of, I'm sure many of you have seen one of these, but this is just one of our schedules. It shows you the description of the activity, start dates, finish dates, and then way over on the right, it'll tell you if you have positive float, meaning you're ahead of schedule, or negative float, in which the PM would have to come up with a way to get the project back on schedule. All right, local programs. I saw some local agency staff join this meeting, so it's good to have you on the call. So another part of our program that's very important is our work with the local agencies. We partner a lot with our local agencies, mostly cities and counties, on transportation projects. Anytime funds are passed between DOT and a local agency, a lot of coordination is necessary. Executed documents, agreements signed by both parties are needed. DOT has staff called our local programs department who track these projects from initial planning all the way through construction completion. There are multiple different situations where local programs gets involved. It could be locals giving DOT funds to add features to one of our projects on their behalf. We also have a LAP program in which federal funds are allocated to a local agency through DOT for the locals to do the project. In that situation, both sides need to ensure that the locals are following all federal guidelines to stay eligible for those federal funds. We also have state grant programs in which DOT allocates state dollars to local agencies so they may do projects on their local roads. While often a forgotten part of our program, projects coordinated by DOT involving local agencies are a very important part of what we do and are included in our 5-year work program. All right, another piece.
May I have a question regarding the previous slide that you were talking about?
Sure.
So when you say the money is passed between FDOT and the local agencies, so if both of you coordinate on like a one project, then one of you actually will be who execute the project. So if local support that project, the money will transfer to FDOT or vice versa, right?
That is correct. Yes, we have the situation where, again, the locals would give us money and we would be the lead department and would construct that project. And then we have other situations where the locals receive the money through us and they construct the projects.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. All right, so on to GIS, which is an exciting part of what we do here in the department. So I like to say for GIS that, of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a GIS map is worth, like, I don't know, millions of words. This is such a great tool for employees here in the district. We have layers for all sorts of things, and we continue to grow those as ideas. Well, there's never a lack of ideas, but resources, basically just having the time and the resources to put these together. But we do keep our 5-year work program on GIS, which is super easy to look up projects. The screenshot here shows how it would look if you zoomed in to our work program layer and selected a project. You get, high level basic information on that project. So that's a great tool. And we do use GIS for our work program public hearing every year. So the public can utilize that to check on projects in their areas. And then they can provide comments back to us. Some other examples of GIS layers that we have, we've actually have an inventory of all of our signs, each and every one on a state roadway. And in case you were curious, that is 32,722 of them. We have pictures and GIS locates on all of those. We also have drainage maps, right-of-way maps, local agency projects, interchange documents, concrete roadway locations, bridges, and I could keep going. We have a bunch of layers in a GIS. So it's a great resource for everyone in the district. And then I should have put your picture on here, Megan. The final department in program management is actually the one employee department, which is my fellow presenter today, Megan. So I am not going to mention this because she's going to talk in detail about what she does here in a few minutes. All right, so now that I've explained kind of the overall function of program management, I'll try to tie it together just to show you kind of why all of our departments are under the program management umbrella. So you're going to start with a project, of course. That'll come to us from another department. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So we determine that's a priority project for the district and we want to fund it. Well, we need an estimate, right? How much are we going to program on it? So that's where PS&E comes in and they provide an estimate to us and then it goes over to work program. They work their magic.
فاهمنا؟ اسماء شركات يشتغلوا فيها، شركات مثلا متخصصة في شيء في مجال معين.
Excuse me, is somebody not muted themselves? Okay, sorry for that, Kelly, please clarify.
All good. So yeah, work program has this project. Now they have an estimate, so they work their magic and look in their pots of money and they fund the project in a certain year. Then it goes to our scheduling department. They create a schedule, make sure it can actually be done in that year. Then you throw in our local agency projects, which have to follow this same process. Again, whether we're doing the project on behalf of the locals or the locals are doing the project with funding through DOT, they still have to follow the same general guidance. And again, you have GIS as a resource, and then Megan gets involved in the whole process through a lot of what she does. So that's kind of the flow chart, very simplistically, for program management. And now I want to shift gears a little and talk more about the work program side and how funding is allocated to us and some recent impacts that we've had due to our pandemic. So FDOT is the only state agency that operates on a cash flow of commitment methodology. So what does that mean? It means that we use the cash that we have on hand today to pay for contracts and projects that are already underway, that were executed in the past. So that allows us to begin work on projects before the total amount of cash is actually available to fund a project. So if we let a $400 million project today, we don't need that $400 million sitting in front of us today. That cash will be paid out as the contractor progresses and invoices us, likely over multiple years. So we need to ensure we have the cash on hand to pay the contractor when he's completing or she is completing the work. So in order for this method to work, we need to have accurate future revenue forecasts, and we must adapt our work program to those changes, whether it be increases in funding or decreases in funding. We need to constantly, be changing what's programmed based on that. We have what we call an annual work program update cycle. Many of you out there are involved in this in one way or another. So that typically starts in January of each year and finishes after our public hearing in the fall, and then ultimately when our secretary reports to the FTC. So during that update cycle is when new projects are funded, typically in our new 5th year. Estimates on projects already funded are updated based on latest information. And then decisions to projects can be made, such as advancing projects if there's a need to advance it, or deletions or deferrals for different reasons. And many of those decisions depend on the allocations that we get each year. FDOT primarily operates from dedicated sources of funding, which makes us also a unique state agency. The State Transportation Trust Fund, STTF, is statutorily created for transportation purposes. That revenue comes from our gas tax. So that's the meat of our funding. We also have some general revenue, which comes from other sources, such as dock stamps and some user fees, but that's not a substantial source of funding. So each year, allocations are given to districts based on statutory formula, which basically puts the money, for the most part, back in the areas where those funds were collected. And yes, we do have a crystal ball. So I want to talk a little bit about this last year's update cycle, because it was unique, of course. To say things have been different for all of us is, of course, an understatement, but that was no different for transportation funding. So we do have a crystal ball that helps us estimate what our cash flow will be in the future. This crystal ball resides within the Estimating Revenue Conference Committees, also known as the REC. The REC is part of the Office of Economic and Demographic Research for the state of Florida. They meet occasionally throughout the year and look into this crystal ball and come up with, they forecast economic trends that are going to affect revenues. The Transportation Revenue Conference is one of 19 separate conferences that are held throughout the year. When the REC met last August to talk transportation, of course, with people staying at home more, the outlook was not good. So what came from that conference were allocation reductions of $1.4 billion with a B statewide throughout 2026. Through 2026. So that was a big hit, and that included $431 million of revenue impacts in current year statewide. Those reductions, of course, occurred due to less income from gas tax, less people on the road, less people buying gas. We also had reduced revenue from rental car surcharges, as well as a reduction in motor vehicle related licensing fees. So again, less people out doing stuff means less money in our pocket. So that's where our reduction came from. So what did we do? Well, central office put out guidance to all districts on how we should handle this. And there were some things that were off the table that we could not, that we couldn't touch with our reductions. So those included contracts that were already executed. If we had a construction contract already underway, we didn't want to stop that contract. So we needed to keep the cash set aside to pay those contracts. Debt service, can't touch that. We have to pay off our debt and our loans. Safety projects that were in our 5-year work program were not to be deleted or deferred. And preservation related projects were not to be touched as well. Everything else was pretty much up for grabs, and it was up to the districts to determine how to best balance their work program with the reduction. We did have to defer projects. It was painful, still is, but it's what we had to do. We dug into couch cushions as much as we could at first, looking for funding on any projects that wasn't absolutely necessary, and took those funds off. We reduced contingency levels down as low as we could. We keep those funds in contingency for needs that come up, such as increases in design fees, additional right-of-way needs, or maybe bids that come in high. So that was kind of a risky reducing the contingency, but again, we really didn't have any other choice. So another thing to note with those reductions is we really didn't have many funds to add many new projects this last cycle, unless they were safety or preservation related. So I'm sure many of you have seen in the news over the past few months the deferral of a few of our projects, but the big one was the deferral of our Tampa Bay Next West Shore Interchange project. That project, which includes basically a complete redo of the I-275 at State Road 60 interchange, had to be deferred from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 26. There were other projects that were deferred as well, but that $1.4 billion one is the one that's hit the news the most. Some good news, the REC did meet last December, and the outcome was a little positive. They had an increase in revenue of about $83 million statewide over the next 5 years, so it's not a lot, but at least it's headed in the right direction. And then one last slide for me before I turn it over to Megan. I just wanted to touch on, we keep talking about projects, like how does a project become a project here in the district? And projects can come from many different locations, and I have some examples here. We get projects through our metropolitan planning organizations. We have 4 MPOs within District 7. They're the Hillsborough MPO, Pasco MPO, Hernando Citrus is one MPO, and then Forward Pinellas is the Pinellas MPO. So each year they go through an extensive process to prioritize their top needs, and we fund as many of those as we can, of course, till the pot runs dry. We have projects which, based on benefit cost ratios, qualify for federal safety funds. Districts prioritize those, and we fund as many as we can. We have 3R, resurfacing, restoration, and rehabilitation projects every year. Each year, every lane of every state road is driven, and measurements are taken for crack, rut, and ride ratings. And then the ones with the worst ratings are milled and resurfaced each year, along with other minor upgrades. Other departments, drainage, rail, traffic operations, they all have their needs, and they prioritize those as well, and we fund those to the greatest extent that we can. So that's the bottom line with all that is there are always more needs than we have funding for, so that's why everything needs to be prioritized. And that actually concludes my portion, and now I'm going to get up and hand the reins over to Megan, our special projects engineer, and she's going to talk about all the exciting acronyms that she deals with as our special projects engineer in District 7. So I'm going to yeah.
Before that, may I ask a question about, so you mentioned about the reduced funding?
Yeah.
And that those are kind of absolute numbers. So relatively, what is the percentage of that?
I don't know if I've seen a percentage, to be honest. I don't know the percentage wise of that.
Okay, that's
I'll have to get back. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It was a good chunk. Again, it was out over 5 years, so it wasn't all in the 1 year. But $1.4 billion over 5 years. That's a big hit. But our work program every year is a few billion. So it's a decent percentage, but it wasn't crazy high. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Kelly said, my name is Megan Miller, and I'm the Special Projects Engineer here at District 7. I work with her in program management, and we're part of the Transportation Development Department overall. And I provide support to different projects at specific phases in their life cycle to help advance our mission in District 7. I like that I get to be involved in a lot of different things, and I get to work with a lot of different people throughout our organization, so there's a lot of variety. And we joke that my job is best described by a list of acronyms, or alphabet soup, as we sometimes call it. I'll go through the acronyms, and then I'll talk about each of them in more detail later on. I manage the general engineering consultant contracts and the design build support contracts. I coordinate value engineering studies and cost schedule risk analysis workshops. I help facilitate cost savings initiatives. I'm our liaison for the errors and omissions process in District 7. I help facilitate community aesthetic feature review, and I support right-of-way for eminent domain cases. So currently District 7 has 3 general engineering consultant contracts and 2 design build support contracts for a total combined value of approximately $100 million over the next 5 years. Our GEC contracts are very comprehensive, and they basically support DOT on anything and everything. So they're able to respond to us at a moment's notice when we need assistance. I spend a lot of time coordinating with the GEC firms on work orders for their contract, funding, and schedules on completing some different items. Most of the GEC support includes engineering-related duties, such as roadway design assistance, environmental permitting, plans review, project scope development, cost estimating, and support for utilities during the construction phase. We can also use the GEC for some limited non-engineering tasks too, like procurement assistance, public meetings, and public outreach efforts. GEC consultants work as an extension of our staff, often right beside us in our building. We have many consultants who are embedded in the building, and they've been here so long that most of us might not even realize that they're a consultant anymore. They're just part of the group. And they're very well versed in what we do. They're excellent partners in meeting our objectives and helping to complete our work. We also use the GEC staff members as technical experts for training and mentoring for our staff too, especially on newer technologies like 3D plans review. Because they're available to support us, they're very valuable when we're short-staffed or if we have a hiring freeze and we need additional assistance. Conversely, they can also help when we have a big influx of projects, like if we get any stimulus money, where it's an all-hands-on-deck situation to apply the money to projects and advance them through the production cycle. Our design build support contracts assist with preparing concept development plans, and we request for proposal documents for design build projects within District 7. Many of these projects start off as a conventional design bid build project, and they have some level of preliminary engineering complete before we make a decision to convert them to design build. One example of this is the I-75 and Martin Luther King Jr. interchange, which is going to become a diverging diamond interchange, and it's currently advertised for bid. So it had portions of its engineering work completed before upper management identified it as a design build project. So when this happens, then the design build consultant takes over from the previous engineering firm, and they finalize the concept plans. They coordinate with procurement on all the other documents that are needed for the bid package. So a good working relationship with procurement and extra attention to meeting schedule milestones are very important for design build, because the design build lettings are balanced statewide, not just within our district. And like the I-75 and MLK project that I referenced, the most interesting ones are the larger ones, and they're adjusted score design build, where they're awarded on the combination of the firm's technical proposal and the proposed project price. And they also include alternative technical concepts for review and evaluation. This is where the firms can propose different methods of completing items that are shown on the plans, and DOT reviews the alternatives, and then we determine which ideas are viable for inclusion in the final project and which ones aren't. So moving on from the contract management part of my job, I also coordinate BE studies and CSRA workshops. We do have consultants on statewide contracts that actually lead the workshops, but I'm responsible for setting up the work order, arranging funding for the workshops, scheduling the workshops, any pre or post meetings that we might have, and also ensuring that the consultant completes all their necessary reporting at the end so we can close out their tasks. So first of all, VE studies are completed for projects with an estimated construction cost of $50 million or more. This requirement is waived for design build contracts since, as I mentioned, they go through the alternative technical concept process and they generate innovative ideas that way. VE studies use an interdisciplinary team in a week-long session to review the project and evaluate alternate ways to achieve the same goal. It leads to innovative ideas and cost savings on our projects. At the end of the week, we meet up with upper management and we present all of our ideas and determine which ones we'll accept and incorporate into the design. And you know, sometimes your ideas can be a little wild and crazy and we end up not accepting those. But you know, we do review and talk about them and decide which ones are going to be the best. Because these are for larger projects, the VE studies don't come up that frequently, maybe 1 or 2 per year based on the production schedules. Cost schedule risk analysis workshops are typically 3 to 4 days, and they review even larger projects such as the West Shore interchange that Kelly mentioned to see what factors pose a risk. So some questions include, is there contamination in the area? Is there an unknown utility? And then the workshop evaluates risks to the cost and schedule by discipline, and then we plan out strategies to mitigate the risks. This provides for better schedule and budget controls of the project. And because these are for really big major projects, we don't do them that frequently, maybe 1 every 3 or 4 years. So they're not a common occurrence around the building here. Another option is called CRAVE, which is a combined VE and CSRA workshop, but we haven't completed one of those in District 7. So if we were to be able to do one, that would be something new for us. Cost savings initiatives are creative solutions that are proposed by a contractor either before or during construction to build elements of a project in a different way that would save time and money. So I receive the CSI proposals from the contractor and I distribute them to an interdisciplinary team for review in accordance with the project specifications and the DOT procedures. We ensure that the proposal complies with engineering principles and that it doesn't bring unnecessary risk to the project. We can reject the proposals if they don't meet the needs of DOT or if they don't meet the needs of the community that the project is located in. We have to evaluate all the facets because some things might be different in downtown Tampa than they would for a project in rural Hernando County. You might have different lane closure restrictions, you might have different work hour restrictions. So any cost savings that result from a CSI proposal are shared 50-50 between the contractor and the department. There have been some proposals that maybe are not a large dollar amount, but they shave weeks off the construction schedule. So then they're beneficial to accept them because they're beneficial to all parties. Errors and omissions. This is kind of a broad term. And this is something that I find pretty interesting right now. It includes errors, omissions, conflicts, or ambiguities that are found on the engineer's design plans during the construction process, and then they need to be resolved. So a couple of examples. One would be where the plans show an overhead sign structure and a guardrail too close together, where it's impossible to construct the elements as shown. Another example is failing to include all the contributing area in the stormwater modeling so that constructing the system as designed causes flooding to an adjacent property. So first and foremost, engineer, DOT, and the contractor need to work together on a solution to be able to continue building the project and move the schedule along. But this is almost always going to cause an increase in the construction costs. After construction can proceed, DOT then evaluates the case and determines if we need to pursue recovery of this additional cost from the engineer as a result of their E&O. Per Florida statutes, DOT has 2 years from the date an issue was discovered as an E&O to be able to recover the costs. So you might think that 2 years is a long time, but it really isn't. Often it's not determined that it's an E&O until well after discovery, and you've already eaten into part of that 2 years before you even begin working on a resolution and whether or not you're going to recover the costs. So we updated our E&O procedure during this most recent fiscal year statewide, and this is our new color-coded process map. So it looks busy, and it is, but we start up at the top left with discovery when you do discover an issue during construction. And it goes through different stages of assessment and ultimately results in a closeout and resolution of the issue down at the bottom right-hand side. So keeping an eye on the timeline and documenting every step toward the resolution is very important when you're working on an E&O. So this process can be a little bit tricky. The engineer might not always agree that it was their error that caused the issue. And I get that because no one likes to be wrong or to know that they made a mistake. The DOT must review all the project documents, meet and discuss with discipline experts within our building, and we meet and discuss with the engineer to determine the best course of action in bringing the issue to resolution. Sometimes we review and we determine that it's not an E&O, and we close out the case with a $0 recovery. Some cases are reviewed, and maybe the engineer is not 100% responsible. The contractor could also be partly to blame, and we negotiate a recovery amount accordingly. Some cases, the engineer is found to be responsible, and DOT recovers 100% of the cost. It all depends on the specifics of each case, which is why it's important to evaluate everything and take the time that you need to collect all the details, but just not more than 2 years, of course. The E&O cases are good lessons learned, and they're helpful for other engineers, designers, plan reviewers, and project managers so they can look out for similar issues on future projects. Community aesthetic features is the next part of my job, and this includes public art or monument signs that are placed by a local agency within the DOT right-of-way. They're designed, paid for, installed, and maintained by the local agency. The design needs to meet the requirements of DOT design or the FDOT Design Manual, Chapter 127, and they should represent something of significance to the local area. So, for example, the picture here is the Drew Park signs on Dale Mabry near the stadium, and they pay tribute to the neighborhood's history and early aviation. DOT reviews the design, provides input when needed, and approves the design prior to installation. We also need to sign a maintenance agreement between DOT and the local agency so that the agency knows the terms of maintaining the feature within our right-of-way. Here's a few more examples of community aesthetic features. The one on the left that we're probably all familiar with is the St. Petersburg Tower on I-275. The others shown here are from concept plans that we've reviewed recently. On the top right is the City of Clearwater. They're proposing to install signs on pedestrian overpasses over US 19, and this is still in the conceptual review phase within DOT, so that's not approved yet. And then on the bottom right is the City of Tarpon Springs, and they were recently approved to install new monument signs. So these signs should be under construction soon if they're not already. And then the last thing that I work on is I provide support to the right-of-way and legal teams for eminent domain cases. This applies to either full or partial parcel takings based on the needs of each project. Some of the things that I do include reviewing plans and engineering documents to help assemble exhibits used to support our case. I also respond to interrogatories from opposing counsel regarding design elements of the project and how they impact the subject property. We do have GEC support in this area to serve as an expert witness, so I have not had to testify in court as an expert on behalf of the department, but that's something that I may have to do in the future. This work has been a little bit slow over the past year due to the fact that we haven't really had as many projects needing to acquire right-of-way, plus COVID slowed down the court proceedings for the cases that we do have. But when I do get a request from legal for any of the drawings or the documents, they're usually right on the top of the to-do list. They have a short turnaround time, so I need to respond to them. That was my alphabet soup of a job. Thank you everyone for your time. You gave up your Friday lunchtime to listen to Kelly and I. And if you have any more questions for us, please let us know and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Megan, for the presentation. So, audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and you can talk.
Hi, this is Jill Capadoro with Quest Corporation of America. I really just wanted to say thank you. I learned a lot. My vocabulary has expanded, and I just want to thank both Kelly and Megan for doing a really nice job with the presentation. And thank you, WTS, for hosting us.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Yes, we like our acronyms and our terminology for sure.
I think in the meeting chat, the Vishaka Shivaraman mentioned, could you please send a copy of the presentation? So
Yes.
Is it okay? Yeah, if you send to me, then I will distribute to all the audience.
Yes, absolutely. We'll do that right away.
And I do have a question regarding the, so you mentioned the error and omissions, right? So error probably will relate to certain costs and maybe reasonable, not reasonable. And there could be some like over budget not caused by error and omissions. Is that often? And how FDOT handles that, where the extra money coming from?
Sure. So yeah, during construction projects, things come up quite often just with, I mean, the nature of what we do. We do surveys, but you're not going to capture all the situations that are out there. So there are many times when we have to do supplemental amendments to the contractor that has nothing to do with a poor design. It's just because. And that's where I mentioned on one of my slides, we keep a contingency box of funding. And that's exactly what that's for. If they have an SA, some unforeseen circumstance on a project, we just draw from our contingency box to cover that. And that happens. That's not rare that happens. So yeah, when we have to raid our contingency box, it just makes us really nervous that we're not going to have the funds there when we need them. Yep.
All right, any other questions from our audience?
I have a quick question. This is Julie Duggins. I'm with Paleo West Archaeology. Great presentation. That was really interesting. You talked a little bit about funding, and I really enjoyed the explanation of the funding structure and essentially pre-funding project, or spending the money before you see the money. I'm curious to know what you think. I noticed, 1.5 billion reduction, but we also saw during coronavirus, our governor put a big emphasis on transportation and seemed to commit to greater funding as part of an idea of a relief package. How do you think that'll transfer to District 7?
Sure. So we actually have already received, the state has funds from the last relief package that was put out by the federal government. So we have received those funds for a couple of years from now. So during the state cycle is when we will, work with our MPOs and internally to figure out how to spend those funds. We anticipate in this stimulus package that's working its way through the federal process that there will be more funding coming down from that. We are running exercises every day, kind of guessing what the rules will be on those funds, so we have projects ready to roll. Our process is a long process. It takes us, we program new stuff 5 years out. Well, these funds will be to spend now. So we're just kind of getting our ducks in a row to make sure we're ready to spend those when they fall into our lap. But we do anticipate getting more from that. And like I said, we've already received some relief funds from the last package. All through the feds, though. That's not through the state, that's through the federal government.
Interesting, thanks.
You're welcome. Great question.
To follow up Julie's question on the impact of COVID-19, I heard some comments saying because of the slow traffic, some projects actually could carry forward faster than usual. So have you seen that? And
yes, absolutely. So right when COVID first hit, which goodness has been almost a year at this point, and people stopped driving, the governor and down through the chain of command said, you guys got to start cranking through these construction projects that are already going on, because your lane closure restrictions that we implement is based on traffic volumes. well, there's no traffic. So we actually had, I believe it was 22 projects that were under construction over this past year that were accelerated. So we went back and looked at the lane closure restrictions we had placed, and we lifted a lot of those restrictions and got the contractors working more hours. So yes, we absolutely did that, and that was at least a plus out of all of this.
That's right. So I think the acceleration actually will save some cost. So will the contracts be rewarded because of that, or it's just because of COVID-19?
Yeah, I don't think the contractors were really rewarded. It just allowed them to get them, you know, quicker, so they would have more availability then to start bidding on some new
Projects.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it does save us some because a lot of our pay items are each day cost. So obviously less days, less cost on our part. Yep.
Good. All right. Anything else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. For a design build project, does FDOT provide design plans like at the beginning, or does that fall to whoever is awarded the contract?
Sure. So what DOT does on most design builds is we will provide, as part of the advertisement, what we call concept development plans. So those are usually up to about 15% designed, and it just gives you a high-level concept of what we're looking for. There are no, you know, details on the design. That then comes once we award the contract to a contractor who teams with a designer. That designer then takes those concept plans and actually designs them into detail. If that answers your question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then one other, on a project like the I-75 in Big Bend,
Yep.
How long would you estimate a project like that would take?
I'm going to guess that's a 3 to 4 year project. We do develop contract time for that for all of these projects. I don't recall the specifics on that one, but that's a pretty decent sized project. So I'm guessing in the 3-year range, give or take.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right. If no more questions, I want to thank again to our presenters. Thank you so much for delivering this presentation and answer all the questions. And thank you for being here. Thank you so much, Kelli and Megan.
All right. Thank you for having
the
us.
opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll send the presentation over to you. And if anybody has follow-up questions, feel free to reach out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice day and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Okay.